Welcome to another episode of Chak's Chat. Join Chad Chelius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Creative Pro Week. The Creative Pro Week conference is in Phoenix, Arizona this year and is on June 5th through June 9th. It's an amazing conference for design professionals, and this year also includes some accessibility sessions that Dax and I will be presenting. And if you go to the Creative Pro website and you use code CPNCAD, you'll get an additional $100 off any multi-day pass, which is pretty cool. So head on over to creativeproweek.com for more information. My name is Chad Chelius, and I'm an Adobe certified instructor, as well as director of training solutions and principal at Chak's Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I'm director of media productions here at Chak's Training Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialists. So if you would like your certification, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org/certifications and learn more about how you can sign up to take that test and get your certification. How you doing, Chad?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Not too bad. I got my first course of bricks laid on my koi pond, at least dry stacked, just to figure it out. And it's not as bad of a situation as I thought it was going to be, but it's still not. I'm going to have to cut probably 30 or so custom bricks to make this whole thing fit. But at least there is hope. There is hope for my koi pond still.
For sure. Well, you'll have to post some pictures when you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chad, today I think we should talk about something we don't really mention a whole lot, which is EN 301-549, which is the European standard for accessibility. And I thought it was interesting because, one of the things that people think about is, well, everything falls back to WCAG, right? All accessibility requirements, at least I hope they think, all accessibility requirements really fall back to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And EN 301-549 is not different from that. But I thought we would talk about some of the nuances that we discovered as we were doing a little bit deeper dive into what it is.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, because the number of people who listen to our podcast who are from some of the European countries is pretty high, right? So we don't want to leave any of those folks out. And, this falls under, the purview of document accessibility. So we thought it would be really important for us to at least talk about it and kind of open up everybody's eyes to the concept of this standard.
Yeah. You talk about statistics, Chad. I pulled up while you were talking, I pulled up our Libsyn, our podcast statistics, and of the total downloads that we have, the majority, 2,942, come from the United States, 531 from Canada, 166 from the UK, 143 from Australia, 110 from Germany, 87 Sweden, 66 Netherlands, 52 Spain, Belgium, Finland, and the list goes on and on. So definitely, while the majority are the United States, we do have podcast listeners from all over the world, and we want to make sure that we have content for them as well. So
absolutely.
I think we should start with who the EN 301-549 applies to, right? I mean, that's definitely, I know some people are thinking, well, that only applies to people over in the UK or in England or somewhere over in there. But in fact, Chad, we found out something surprising or something interesting, right?
We sure did. We found out that even though EN 301-549 applies to the European Union and what did they call it? The
EEA, the European Economic Area. Yep. Which includes Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway.
Exactly. But what we really found interesting, Dax, was even though this standard applies to the EU and that other group, it has also been adopted by other non-EU countries, such as Canada, New Zealand, Australia,
Mm-hmm.
and what was that last one?
Switzerland.
Switzerland. Yeah.
Yes.
So, obviously other countries have seen value in this standard and have also adopted, the standard as well. So,
well, we always hear about AODA, right? And the Ontarian, the Accessible Ontarians Disability Act. But I didn't know that the Treasury Board of Canada has adopted 301549 as its accessibility standard for ICT goods and services, which is ICT is a fancy way of saying electronic goods and services, right? So it's information and communications technology. So that would be kiosks or copiers or any of the other kind of physical items you might find in a workplace environment. Even things like bank teller machines or, anything that you might interface with.
Right. And we have a tendency when we think of Canada to immediately reference AODA.
Right.
But that's only one of the 9 Canadian provinces.
Oh, don't test me. I am a stupid American.
I hope none of our Canadian friends are going to criticize me on that one. If I messed that up, I apologize. But I thought there were 9 or 11 provinces in Canada, and AODA only applies to one of them. Right. So, there's a bunch of other provinces in Canada that are also doing accessibility and certainly are not following AODA on that.
Come on, so. Chad, don't you know that there are 10 provinces and 3 territories? Each province and territory has its own capital.
I do know that. I mean,
I did not. I just Googled it.
There's Yukon, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, Newfoundland. I know a bunch of them, but obviously
you are way better than me, because I'm looking at these names and I'm like Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, BC. Yeah, I know those. And Nova Scotia. I guess I'm thinking back to my Risk days, playing the game Risk, where you put the little pieces on the board. And I'm thinking about those, but no, I am not a great geography.
Now, can you identify them on the map? That's the next question. Right?
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm looking at the map right now and I'm going, wow, I did not know. Nunavut, Nunavut, Anyway. We digress. So talking about these things, right? The thing that's interesting is that EN 301549 really separates. It has 3 different chapters: one on web, one on web documents, and then one on non-web documents. And then one on software, right? So what's interesting is you might think, oh, there's a whole set of criteria that applies to non-web documents, PDFs. This is the first thing that comes to mind, that we need to know about. And when you start opening up the statute and start looking at the different requirements, what do we find out, Chad?
Well, I mean, pretty much every one of them is simply kind of like pointing their finger to the WCAG success criterion that it applies to, which is totally fine. I mean, we talked about this in the beginning. To be honest, WCAG does a very good job of kind of outlining, accessibility requirements. But EON 301549, they kind of broke it down a little bit differently, right? But when appropriate, they're simply saying, hey, to know more about info and relationships, see, WCAG success criterion, info and relationships.
Well, And you know what? As you start reading through this, you'll start seeing void, 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 void under all these different numbers. And at first it caught me by surprise a little bit. I had to do a little research. And in fact, in the beginning, under the notes section on page 52 for note 6, it says, void clauses have been inserted in order to maintain alignment of the numbering system in clauses 9, 10, and 11. So in other words, 9, 10, and 11 have, 10's got 10.1.2.4, and then in 11 it might say void for that one, so that the numbering systems all stay the same. It doesn't for that specific example, but several places in here it just says void. 10.3.2.4 it says void, because there is a 9.3.2.4 but not a 10. So they want to keep the numbering system all kind of the same. So that's,
So you mean between the categories of web documents, non-web documents, what was the other thing you said? Software.
Yeah.
You're saying between all those categories, the numbering system is in theory the same, but sometimes within that category, one of the items doesn't apply.
Yes.
In that situation. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So they just write that they include the number, but then put void after it. So that everything stays the same.
Sure.
The other thing that I actually had to ask you about, and we talked about this off air, is a web schema. I really had not dealt with web schema. I know you come from an XML, XMP kind of background. That's been your world for a while. Definitely not something I'm familiar with, but note 8 inside EN 301549 says it is best practice to provide metadata on the accessibility of a document within or separate to the document using web schemas accessibility 2.0.
Yeah. So, and this is an area where, you and I talked about, we have to do a little bit more research. I mean, fundamentally, I understand the concept of a web schema. Like when you create XML documents, you can add a schema to that document. And a schema is basically just a set of rules that says, these are the XML tags that you're allowed to use. This is the structure in which they're supposed to be organized. How it applies to PDF, and I think the description that you had just given was, I think it's really relative strictly to metadata within that PDF file. I think the question you and I have is, how is that different from the metadata we add in the properties dialog box? How is that different from using a schema? And my guess is that it's about automation. Right. My guess is that it's a way that you could kind of automate instead of having to manually go in and do that. So we'll talk about that in a future podcast and dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, definitely. I think people's brains might explode if we started going into the nuances of XML and XMP and how to attach those into a PDF document. So we're not going to go over all of the different items within the EN 301549, but we did want to show kind of note a couple of different things. One of which is 10.1.3.1 info and relationships. Now, of course, we said that if, like most of the requirements inside of 301549, it references non-web documents. It references WCAG 2.1 success criteria, but it also had a note in here, which I thought was interesting. It says where documents contain non-standard structure types, roles, it is best practices to map them to a standard structure type as a fallback solution for the reader. And I thought, fallback? Yeah. How is a role map the fallback? It's the standard. I don't know about you, but I can't think of a document that I've created anytime where I didn't make a style for something other than just headings and body paragraphs.
Yeah. I mean, and you and I talked about this briefly before we hopped on this podcast, that every source application we use, including InDesign, Word, PowerPoint, creates a role map that basically maps the non-standard tag to a standard tag to make it relevant. And I'm really curious about the statement in EN 301549 that's saying that you can use it as a fallback because it's pretty critical, right? I mean,
Right.
it's pretty much required, So I found that a little interesting.
Well, and then the next one that I thought was interesting is actually under one of those sections we said was void. 10.2.4.5, which should be multiple ways, but it's actually voided in 301549. And if someone knows anything more about this, we'd love to hear, if you've got some extra information. But it says the related web page requirement, multiple ways, does not apply to a single document, but to a specific definition of sets of documents that are rare. So in a PDF, I'm thinking, well, a portfolio, but portfolios inside Acrobat are not accessible. They're not keyboard accessible. You can't move from document to document accessibly inside a portfolio. So it seems like we all, kind of the standard that we've always established is that bookmarks, that your document needs to have multiple ways to navigate the document. Headings, bookmarks, TOCs, right? Those things are typical or on-page navigation elements that allow you to move from area to area. But what this is saying is that multiple ways doesn't apply. So that's, to me, I think, very interesting. And I was kind of surprised to see this note in here.
Yeah. And again, maybe we're misinterpreting it. But I mean, as you read it, I mean, it seems to make perfect sense. And the fact that EN 301549 is often referencing WCAG, you've got to believe that they're aware of that requirement. So why does it not apply in EN 301549, but it is relevant in WCAG? So it's a really good question.
I gotta believe that I can only imagine a group of individuals sitting in a room talking about what does multiple ways mean, and somehow the conversation got shifted to this multiple documents, and then somebody said, well, it doesn't apply then, right? Because you have just a single document. So I think maybe, I mean, this is totally world according to Dax, I'm totally guessing here, but maybe it's just a matter of not understanding the nuance of what it means for multiple ways. It's like, what is the definition of is? What is, right? If you can't establish what the definition of multiple ways is applying to, then it really makes it really hard to understand how it applies or doesn't apply to a specific document. But we'd love to hear from you guys if you know something else that we don't.
Yeah, I'd love one of our European friends, and we talked to many of them, on the Facebook group and via other methods. And I'd love for one of them to kind of chime in and explain a couple of these to us.
Well, and for those of you who don't know, we do have a PDF accessibility Facebook group. Thank you to all of our loyal listeners who are listening right now. We really appreciate you. But we do have a PDF accessibility Facebook group. So go on to Facebook and look up PDF accessibility. I think we're approaching 3,500 members right now, Chad. It's doing really well. So, yeah. So that was kind of it for EN 301549. I mean, I know it's, we thought, boy, this could be a deep dive topic, but as we started looking into it, really almost everything in this criteria kind of falls back and says this success criteria is identical to WCAG 2.1 success criteria, and then it lists whatever success criteria. So interesting that it definitely falls back. The one thing though, Chad, I think we might close with this is that EN 301549 does differentiate between web documents and non-web documents. So while Section 508 or WCAG applies to web-facing public documents, right? Most people in the United States would say, well, if you post something to the web, it has to be accessible.
Yeah, and that's a really great point that you bring up, Dax, because when we talk about this, when we talk about accessibility, right, especially when you talk about Section 508, right, we always kind of preface it with any document that's going to be made publicly available online needs to be accessible.
Right.
Right. That's kind of like that's the method by which it's made available to people.
Right.
Right. But you had pointed out that EN 301549 goes beyond just the website. Right.
Right. Yeah, no, and definitely if you, because they've made the differentiation between web documents and non-web documents, it's any electronic transfer of a document. You hand me a thumb drive that's government sponsored. You send me an email with an attachment. All of those things all fall under non-web documents, but then they fall back to the WCAG. So while here in the United States, we kind of, I don't know if hide behind is the right word, but we definitely make the litmus test, the standard. Is it being posted to the web? Is it public facing as the standard? EN 301549 goes a step beyond that and says, yeah, anything you're communicating to the public in any way needs to be accessible.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, you can't get around this requirement by saying, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to put it on my website, but I'm going to mail 100,000 people a jump drive with my PDF, with a PDF on it that they can then read. So it is interesting. And to be clear, in EN 301549, PDFs fall under non-web documents.
Well,
correct?
they actually can fall under both. So they can be considered web documents if they are if they are posted to the web and embedded inside a web page via an iframe or an iframe viewer,
right?
Then they're considered web documents. If you give a direct link to download them, then they could be considered both available through the web, they're accessed through the web. But if you were to email something or give someone an electronic file, then it would be considered non-web. It seems very nuanced. I would want to just say documents, PDF documents, right?
Right. Yeah, because I mean, it almost it makes it a little confusing, right? Because but I've never really thought of it that way. But I suppose when you do think about here in the United States, I mean, PDFs are kind of connected to the web, right? In a lot of ways, right? Even though they're not, right? They're their own separate files, but we tend to think about them as always being somehow connected to the web. And I think it's interesting that EN 301549 says, hey, even documents not on the web, this applies to these files as well. So interesting, really interesting.
Yeah, no. So definitely, guys, while there's not a lot of meat and potatoes here, there are some nuances and definitely some things to know about. So if you have some time, go ahead and get that document, EN 301549, and take a look at it. The current version is version 3.2.1. Take a look and familiarize yourself with some of the nuances. So, yeah,
really great. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope your mind has been expanded a little bit, regarding accessibility standards, beyond, us here in the United States. And we want to thank you guys for tuning in today and listening to Dax and I wax philosophically about document accessibility.
Awesome.
Well, once again, guys, we want to thank Creative Pro Week for sponsoring this podcast. Again, Creative Pro Week is going to be in Phoenix, Arizona this year from June 5th to 9th. And if you want more information, head on over to creativeproweek.com. My name is Chad Chelius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.